He died as he lived, not dying of poison. Blue. Failed assassinations. The Daily Grind, Chapter 148. Nate met up with Miles at the airport. Everything about the interaction was normal, mundane even. Same, too, for the drive in the rental car from the airport to the nicest possible hotel in the small city closest to their target. They had small pleasantries to exchange, but otherwise didn't talk much. They intentionally, especially, did not talk about anything weird. Nate checked them into the hotel, a business booking under an actual company registered out of Iowa. 4 rooms, 2 sets of 2 adjoining suites. He paid, politely thanked the front desk, and sent Miles up to relax while he got everyone else. Then Nate took a walk, found a nearby park with a strange name that would be hard to mistake for anything else, ensured there was no one nearby, and sent a single bland text message. A minute and a half later, 3 pops of air and ripples in space brought 12 people snapping into existence around Nate, holding hands or other applicable limbs in 3 groups. Actually like flying, Deb was in the middle of a sentence, unbroken by their teleport across hundreds of miles. We could have had a nice flight. You would have me in overhead storage, her partner, Frequency of Sunlight, retorted. The cameraconda made a cogent argument. I checked. Airlines do not allow large animals. Her words got a snicker from Bill, the larger man towering nearby and trying not to loom too much. They'd make an exception. Deb crossed her arms and huffed, the pout on her face powerful enough that Nate figured she would have at least a 30% chance of that actually working on a flight attendant trying to tell her that she couldn't take up a whole seat with a cameraconda. I thought this was the professional team, Mars grumbled. It wasn't that he was annoyed to be here or anything, far from it. He'd only been part of this bizarre world for a couple of months, and he felt a kind of buzzing excitement to have the chance to encounter another dungeon. It was more that, accounting for time zones, there was basically no way to get out of this trip without missing at least some sleep, and he hadn't had any coffee. This is the professional team. Dave looked uncomfortable, this far removed from his emotional support dragon. That's why we sent Momo to Australia. Will you please focus? Nate looked like he had a headache, because he had a headache. The group of humans and cameracondas stopped their conversations and focused on him, Knife and Fang stopping mid-sentence about being stored in a carry-on halfway through his point. As soon as he had their attention, Nate gave them the quick briefing. Alright, we got a hotel a short walk from here. Frequency, you are going in a duffel bag to get there. So's every other snake. We're going to keep the weird shit to a minimum, got it? We can talk more once we're out of the open. Some grumbling and swearing to get the 4 cameracondas in the team into their carry bags, and 1 group walk later, they wasted no time getting everyone's luggage put away, and the group collected in one of the suites to discuss their next move. So here's the problem. Nate took the lead with a firm charisma that he didn't tend to show in the day-to-day working at the lair. We're aware of the location, we have a possible path, but we don't know the specifics of the dungeon. Also, as a major complication, we know the old gun has been in the area. He glanced at the cameraconda unit of their team. That's why you're here, specifically. So if we need to get out of her range, we can at least slow her down enough to write in the telepads. He paused and then shifted back. Now, as far as good news goes, we do know where we're looking. We have confirmation there's some weird shit going on. Miles? The young man, unaccustomed to public speaking, or really speaking to other people much at all, withered as everyone turned to him. Yeah? Recap, Nate prompted. Oh, right. Miles cleared his throat and went over the incident, up to the point where he had to leave the area to get medical attention for his phone explosion. Okay, so that's absolutely a dungeon. Dave leaned back against the side of the couch. I'm worried about the other interlopers. Can we be called interlopers too? The other rogue in the room, a short Japanese-American girl who, as near as Miles could tell, changed her name every time she met new people, and today was going by Maki, asked. Dave shook his head before anyone could respond. You're all aspirants until proven otherwise, he told her. The ranking system is nerdy and dumb. Deb, who was an official knight, cut in. Also not relevant to what Dave said, which is that, yeah, there's at least 5 groups that are orbiting this place. 5? Her girlfriend inquired. Count, please. Well, us, the old gun, the woman who went in the first place and obviously isn't on the same team as the old gun, and now these other 2. She counted off on her fingers. I'm sure we could deal with the human ones, if it's one at a time, but even with all of us here, I don't think I trust our ability to take them all at once. Her voice was tired, but not actually that anxious about the prospect of open fighting. Nate made a mental note to himself to check in on if Deb had been seeing one of the Order's therapists. Her brush with death was the kind of thing that would rattle anyone, and while everyone reacted to trauma like that differently, he had a sad feeling about how Deb was handling it. The biggest problem I can think of is they have a 3-day head start on us, Dave commented. Who? Anyone. The old gun especially, but anyone watching Hall... Huh. I already forgot her name. Is anyone else having trouble with that? Dave narrowed his eyes in concentration, but he didn't sound overly concerned. Too much exposure to mimetic effects had dulled him to the terror of the process. A lot of people in the room said yes, though. Great, so that's something to watch out for. Same pattern as the office, you think? Deb thought for a second as she talked. Everyone text someone right now, just in case. Breadcrumb protocol. Phones came out at her suggestion. Do we know if Halliston ever came out of the dungeon? Mars asked, checking the woman's name from his notes. Because if so, we could just ask her what it's like and shortcut that problem. Security risk. Nate shook his head, trying not to crack a smile as the 2 rogues in the room echoed his words preemptively. We cannot, under any circumstances, risk the old gun knowing that we're around. What about notes or maps? Mars persisted. Even if she's working with somebody else, she'll still have a copy of her maps somewhere, right? I do, the engineer commented. You do? Dave raised an eyebrow. Like, of the office? Is that allowed? I mean, I'm not selling it to the highest bidder. Mars looked embarrassed, glancing around for anyone who was on his side here. How else am I supposed to have a map that I don't really use for anything? Nate rubbed his forehead. This was supposed to be the professional group, he uttered. I think the fact that it is the professional group is worse, Dave reminded him. Okay, so, her house is probably under surveillance. Nate tried to salvage the meeting. We are not going to make contact with the trigger-happy idiots that are watching her, but we could stand to know more about them. Miles, you and Mika are on scout duty there. You need any assistance with planning that out? Nate legitimately asked the question. That was something nice about working with the Order. Questions were almost never veiled insults. I'm good, the 2 rogue aspirants said together before sharing a glance. We're good, Maki followed up, and Miles nodded along. Creepy, good for you. Nate turned back to the rest of the group. Mars, if you can, I'd like a more complete report on Dow Chemicals from an information perspective. Turnover rates, if you can find them. Any comments from past employees. People post cryptic bullshit online all the time, and I bet anyone who knows about the dungeon, someone made a quip on Glassdoor that we'll recognize. The young man pushed his hair off his glasses and nodded, already tapping at the laptop he had sitting on the end table. Dave, you're with me. We're going to go check out the building. You can do that voodoo that you and the old delvers do, where you guess what it does and then get unnervingly close to a real answer. I don't do that. Dave shook his head. James does that. Alana did that too. Oh, we could get Momo in here. She can do that, but in the opposite direction. You mean she will be wrong? Frequency of Sunlight's digital voice was somehow drier than normal. Yeah. Then no. The cameraconda, not having eyes to roll, adapted the gesture to making a loop with her entire head. I still want to see the building. Nate cut off their banter. If for no other reason than to scout entrances, we will not be going into any dungeon until we have a good picture of the local landscape, physical and social, okay? Everyone agreed, reluctantly or not. I'm okay with that, actually, Miles said to his new spy partner. I don't want to miss a chance to actually see a dungeon for the first time. Everyone stopped and turned to him. What? Deb and Frequency of Sunlight said together. How? Dave asked, looking confused. Nate just nodded. This was the level of professionalism he had expected. Poor Miles just ducked his head, shrinking away from the room full of attention. I don't know, he yelped. Isn't that normal? Normal's been fucked off for a long time, Nate told him. Alright, anyone who doesn't have an assignment, get some food and some rest. We'll have more to do later. Matt, Bill, you two were quiet this whole time. Got any questions? I don't think I'm in deep enough to have questions yet, Bill replied. But I'm here for whatever you need me for. I'm the hired muscle, Matt reminded everyone. Which wasn't strictly inaccurate. He'd been recruited through the response program and loaned out to them by Harvey to get more experience with, quote-unquote, the weird stuff, at his own request. He was one of those fringe cases, people who didn't exactly clash with the Order's ethic, but maybe didn't internalize it quite all the way yet. Harvey had several people like that, and the idea was to put them on rotation with adventures like this one, get them some exposure to the people and ideas of the rest of the Order in a more personal way, as well as some mental preparation for in case something went horribly wrong that wasn't normal, and that they'd need people with powers to combat. Only time would tell if the plan worked out, but for now, at least, they had someone who knew more martial arts than an orb rank got you, and was willing to get into a fight with them. Alright, Nate nodded at the two, and then at everyone else. Everyone remember, no public magic, no teleporting into anywhere you didn't recently teleport out of. Let's not leave camera records or suspicion that we were here, alright? Good. Let's get to work. Momo and Jamie's flight landed in Sydney around noon, local time. Where this was on their personal clocks was largely irrelevant, at least for Momo. For the high school-aged intern to the Order, who, by his own admission, hadn't been out of his home state in his entire life, the time was probably a little harder to get used to. Not that Momo actually got used to it, she just didn't sleep very much. Alice Springs didn't have a major airport, but it did have a private airstrip nearby, mostly for hobbyists, and the Adelaide airport had irregular short-hop flights out there. Irregular because you either had to plan in advance or get lucky and hitch a ride. Momo had been in favor of rolling the dice and going with the adventure, because, of course she was. Karen had booked them a charter flight without asking. Since the alternative to a flight was a 1,000-mile-long road trip that would likely rival what James and Anesh were doing for a vacation, Momo didn't complain too much, at least not while Karen was within earshot. The experience of landing in Australia was a little surreal. Back home, it was still just barely clawing out of a dark, wet winter. Here, the noon sun beat down through the wide glass window of the airport, warming the air in an endless battle with the air conditioning. Bright yellow-white, the kind of sun that you always thought was neutral until you found yourself with the gray-blue of winter and realized you missed it. The air smells different, the kid next to Momo, struggling to shift his backpack into a comfortable position, exclaimed with a goofy grin. She considered saying something snarky, but honestly, she'd been thinking the same thing. There was a dry, almost electric tang in the air. Even here inside a building, it was different, to be so suddenly dunked into an environment that wasn't home. Momo contained her snark, admitting that maybe she was just jealous that the kid 4 or 5 years younger than she was had so much height over her head. And after they struggled to navigate through social distancing crowds to meet their pilot heading north, and eventually emerged onto the tarmac, the smell took on the aspect of 100 foreign plants just as the temperature soared upward. "So, what you in town for?" their pilot called back to them as they stashed their limited luggage under the seats of their little 4-seater prop plane. She was an older lady, with a bun of gray hair and hands that looked like they'd spent 50 years perfecting the controls of the craft. Jamie, not wanting to cross any lines about secrecy, went with a simple answer that he'd been provided by JP with in case anyone asked. "Visiting family," he called back up front. At the same time as Momo was saying, "Wizard bullshit!" The pilot glanced back at them, took in Momo's explosive grin, visible around the edges of her mask, and the kid trying to subtly remind the other passenger that she wasn't supposed to just say that. She nodded once, looked back at her console, and radioed the control tower to request permission to take off. A few hours later, after a friendly conversation at altitude where the pilot pointedly failed to ask any follow-up questions about the wizard bullshit, the two of them hopped out of the back of the plane, tipped the pilot, realized this wasn't the kind of airport that had rental cars available, and had to improvise. Half an hour wait for the nearest rideshare to get to them, during which time Jamie kept asking her questions about the totems that she made, taking advantage of their time away from people to exercise her persistent curiosity. And then there was another half-hour drive to their hotel, during which time Momo regretted her choice to not wear shorts when the day started. They'd booked the entire top floor of one of the local hotels. Weirdly, this small town in the middle of nowhere actually had multiple hotels, near enough to a couple of very popular public parks that did some decent tourism business. The pandemic must have been hitting them pretty hard, as the front desk had seemed almost excited to have a group of their size come through. Momo, despite her commitment to never sleeping again, had walked into their main suite and promptly collapsed on a couch. Jamie, her loyal assistant, had texted everyone with the verified address and room numbers. A minute later, a crowd of people blinked into existence around them with a series of pressure pops. "Oh hey, the air smells different," Sarah exclaimed with a girlish smile. "Hey guys, how was the flight?" "We could have just teleported," Momo screamed into the couch cushion. "It was nice," Jamie told her non-committally. "The pilot that brought us here was cool." "I would have flown." Ethan puffed up his chest as he dragged a heavy bag out of the middle of the room. Everyone ignored him. Alex, feeling like the only adult in the room for a brief moment, directed Morgan and Color of Dawn over to the side so that they could sort the luggage out. Behind the couch, Chavoy clutched her backpack to her chest, the engineer seeming unsure if she was thrilled by her first teleport or terrified. In the kitchen, Texture of Bark Dust partook of the human custom that James had told him about, and started taking snacks out of the minibar. "Momo!" Sarah shook her friend awake. "Sorry to bother you. You look really tired, but just a quick update. JP was going to come with us, but he got hurt doing whatever he was doing with our friendly neighborhood Fed, so our little group is rounded out by this guy." She jerked a thumb over her shoulder to a Hispanic man with a swimmer's build and a lopsided grin, paired with a sleeveless shirt that showed off thick arms. "This is Diego. He's like JP." "Personally or professionally?" Momo muttered, slumping her face back into the rough pillow of the couch. "Both," Sarah answered with a dry humor. "Yay," Momo muttered. Excuse me." Morgan slid up, shoulders slumped and eyes cast down like he was worried to even ask questions. "Should we check in with the front desk or something?" "Nah," Sarah waved it off. "I'm sure they won't notice, and if they do, I bet people teleport in all the time. We paid for our rooms. It'll be fine." Elizabeth propped herself up on the back of the couch and looked down at Momo. "Do you ever get mad that no one notices all your magic?" she asked. "That people are teleporting everywhere is probably not true." Diego drummed his fingers on his bicep, arms crossed as he considered the statement. His voice was a little airier than Momo had expected from someone with that much muscle. "Do people teleport everywhere?" he asked, more amused than concerned. "Wouldn't you if you could?" Momo challenged. "Yeah, that's why I did it. The teleporting is very choice," he nodded, pinching his fingers together in a gesture of appreciation. "Maybe next time you'd like to teleport with me." He waggled thick eyebrows at Momo, who wasn't really looking. Elizabeth noticed, though, and tensed slightly on the back of the couch. "Oh, he is like JP," Momo commented. She pushed herself up, and, once sitting on the couch, called out to the room that had started to hum with a handful of separate conversations. "Alright, minions, listen up." They did, quieting down as she rubbed around the corner of an eye. "First off, welcome to Australia. I hope you all have permission slips for this field trip." "I do," Jamie answered literally, pulling out a wallet to dig out a literal piece of paper his parents had signed for him. The adult population stared at him for a second before Momo shook her head and continued. "Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? Liz? Actually, wait, hang on. Liz, does Karen know you're here?" she demanded. "Probably." The girl blushed as the attention landed on her. "I told her I was going to hang out with you for a bit." "Oh my God." Momo buried her face in her hands. "She's going to kill me." No, it's fine. I'll text her," Liz promised, pulling out her phone. Momo nodded and got back on track while that social disaster unfolded in front of her. "Alright, welcome to Australia again. So here's the deal. Somewhere within or nearby this small town is Probably a dungeon. If we are very lucky, it's going to be in one of the 20 art galleries in the downtown area. So, we're going to take today to relax, get settled in, get some food, and tomorrow we're going to start poking around and seeing if we can get any signs around here. And when we find nothing? Texture of Bark Dust asked, mouthful of peanuts not impeding their speech at all. I figure we give it a week, Momo shrugged. Half of us have that weirdness sensibility, and I figure that wandering around town with camera condas asking wizard questions will at least be a starting point for flushing anyone out who has a starting point. She looked over at the two new people who had shocked looks on their faces. Jamie, Diego, you guys? Yeah, Diego jumped in. You're just going to... no stealth at all? He looked at the camera condas. You don't think that'll be a problem? I mean, the town's gotten a lot less violent in the last 5 years, according to statistics, Sarah offered. They should be safe. People might think they're art. These are not reassuring excuses, Color of Dawn chimed in. I'm still not really sure why I'm here at all, Morgan reminded everyone. It's cool though, but, it'll be an adventure, and we needed to bring someone so we could tell Daniel there was a full roster, Alex told him. Why wouldn't you want to bring Daniel? Morgan looked puzzled in an almost angry way. He's going to be way better at this than me. Because, Momo told him, when Daniel and Pathfinder map a way to something, there's always misadventures. Always. It's statistically unlikely, and it feels like they're bending causality, and no one wants fucking misadventures in the outback where half the wildlife is venomous. Yeah, okay. Morgan shook his head and blinked. Yeah, that makes perfect sense, sure. Sorry, I'll do my best. Good attitude, Sarah gave him a thumbs up. So, do we know what kind of dungeon we're looking for? Alex asked. Like, is it carnivorous? A chorus of voices replied to her. What? 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 We've seen 3 or 4 so far, right? And only one of them actively tries to kill people, so, carnivore for the murder dungeons, herbivore for the emotional substance ones like the attic. Alex expanded on her point. I know my system needs work, but it's not that weird. It's a good starting point, Momo commented. Anyway, the missing persons rate here is surprisingly low given that a major hobby is camping in the local wilderness preserve. So it's probably either very well hidden or very non-hostile, or it's mostly been taking tourists. That said, our early detection sources did flag it as potentially lethal, so conflicting information. Yay! Sarah cheered mockingly. It's worth remembering, Alex pointed out, that we're supposed to find the thing, not specifically go inside it. We don't need to walk into the murder dungeon, and we probably shouldn't, since we aren't, the most survivory people in the Order. We're scouts, yes. Anyway, Momo said, I'm tired from a massive flight. Next time, we just teleport directly to the hotel. I'm going to nap, everyone split up the rooms, get settled, we'll get a group dinner later and kick this adventure off right. Thank you. Am not hungry, Texture of Bark Dust mentioned, as he consumed the last of the small bags of nuts from the minibar. Elizabeth brought a hand to her mouth, trying to think of what to say as she watched. Your mom's the accountant, right? Diego asked her in a conspiratorial voice. Yeah? Good news, he said, with a small wiggle of his eyebrows. She's not going to be mad at you. This is a good start, Momo decided, sliding back down on the couch until she was horizontal again. Got a good feeling about this one. So, we've got the building mostly to ourselves for 2 weeks? Nikhil asked Reed, leaning back with crossed arms and raised eyebrows. The two of them were in the basement. Reed had lost track of which one. It was the basement that had previously contained a shooting range, which had since been dismantled and maybe moved to another basement, and was now being retrofitted into living spaces. They needed more and more living spaces, it turned out. Even if it was just temporary rooms for on-call response agents and the Camerconda population. A few Camercondas had chosen to move out of the lair to live with humans they'd formed a close bond with, None of them had chosen to live on their own so far, and many members of Response, especially the newer recruits, didn't live it as a lifestyle, but instead showed up for shifts and left when they were done. Still, people added up, so the extra space was welcome, and it would make for a fine batch of quarters when it was fully remodeled, which, sadly for everyone who cared, meant they were going to have to stop firing guns down here. It's not exactly to ourselves, Reed corrected his assistant and fellow mad scientists. JP's here somewhere. There's like 30, 50 camera condos in the building, and the response teams, and the rest of research, and... All right, Nick waved him off, watching as Reed stacked duplicated shield bracers into a cardboard box before handing it off to him. But we could get away with more than normal, right? Last time we got away with anything, I lost an organ, Reed griped. He was still in quite a bit of pain from that, though he did his best not to show it. It was hard, though, when he had to bend down to start cleaning the lower part of the table they were in the process of moving. Research was, essentially, the warehouse of the Order, though it might be more appropriate to say they were the attic closet, constantly filling up with random clutter and trying to figure out if it was earth-shattering or silly. So they made use of a lot of tables. There was a joke that basically any flat surface left unattended in the lair for long enough would act as a magnet for stuff research didn't want to throw out or convert to orbs, but they didn't really know where to put exactly. Oh hey, Reed said, trying to cover up the wince of pain in his voice. The crown thing. I've been looking for this. He rolled over from where he was knelt down to the bottom shelf of the workbench, holding up a wire and wood circlet. How long has this been down here? I don't know. What's it do? Reed settled it on his head and mentally scanned the information it provided into his mind. Inner spirit reignition. 14. 19,984 out of 20,000. 1 day, 2 hours, 44 minutes, 10 seconds. 26. Yep, he exclaimed, plucking it off and looking at it more closely. This is the one that has the effect that increases uses of blue orbs. Nick plucked it out of his hand and added it to the box of status quo equipment. Well, that sounds like something we can duplicate and abuse forever, huh? He nodded to himself. Any other SQ stuff down here for this box? Maybe. I think that one still ranks lower than the cancer cure, unless we find blues that do something similar, Reed replied, not moving from his spot on the floor. Probably. Also, what do you mean, maybe? The bench isn't that large. I mean, there's the weird hexagon thing down here, Reed said. Does that count? If it doesn't level up, it doesn't go in the box. Come on, let's get this and the pile of red orbs over to the research side, and then come back for the rest. Nick tapped his foot impatiently, shifting his grip on the badly weighted cardboard. Reed awkwardly cleared his throat, looking at the concrete floor he was propping himself up on. Can I get a hand up? He asked. I didn't realize how much this would hurt when I started getting down here. Nikhil swore, setting the box to the floor with a clattering thump as he knelt down next to Reed to offer an arm and shoulder for the supposedly intelligent head of research to use to stand. You were supposed to take breaks if you needed them. Reed, you need to take better care of yourself. I'm fine. You're missing roughly 5 pounds of human parts that humans are supposed to have. Yeah, but most of it doesn't hurt that much. And the parts that do hurt? They hurt a lot. Reed's voice came out with a kind of hollow exhaustion. Anyway, grab the nightmare hexagon and let's go. Nick didn't look like he wanted to stop supporting Reed, but the other guy pushed away and seemed to be standing okay on his own. Although Nick made sure to shift the heavier box out of his reach while he grabbed the last status quo artifact. Hey, what did this thing do again? He asked Reed as he looked at the orangish hexagonal polyhedron and very blatantly didn't touch it. I remember it had a bunch of ID badges in it, probably from agents, right? But what else? Did we ever test that? It didn't do anything. Even to people who did test it with their own IDs. Why? Reed asked, shifting the lighter burden he'd grabbed himself into a better position that didn't stress his bad arm. Well, because it's sort of glowing and I'm suspicious, Nick said. Reed dropped his box back to the table and leaned down to check, arms supporting himself against the upper surface. Indeed, the object was glowing. Reed nodded. Okay, good. Verification was out of the way. Now, why was it glowing, and why was that bad for everyone? It was one of the things they'd recovered from Status Quo's HQ. Probably the most important thing, not that they'd know. For all that James and Anesh complained constantly about the lack of health potions or bags of holding, the research division knew that the true tragedy was that no one had found a scroll of Identify. About 1.5 feet in diameter, with a series of perfectly hexagonal sides, the object was made of some kind of pale orange resin or something. They hadn't wanted to damage it to test the substance, and really it didn't matter much when dealing with magic artifacts as near as anyone knew. When they had found it, the indented facets on each face had been filled with ID badges of people who they could identify to a list of Status Quo agents, even through whatever info weapon had been set off. What the object did, no one knew. They'd assumed it was responsible for the agent's unnatural durability, but if it was, they'd never been able to trigger it, and so it had been shuffled from shelf to shelf with the other Status Quo artifacts for months now, mostly ignored. Now it was glowing. Well, a few of the hex surfaces were glowing. A kind of luminescent green, pale and almost unnoticeable unless you looked at it closely. Huh, Reed said. Okay, don't touch that. Should we try the ID thing again? Nikhail asked with a kind of anxious concern. That seems bad, Reed replied. He pulled himself back up with a sigh and a stab of pain in his side. Looks like it's moving. Yeah, it looks a little like, has some little larvae in there or something, Nick said, still on his knees and trying to get as close to the thing as possible for a better look. Like, oh. Oh? Nick settled back on his heels. Is this a hive? He asked. Like maybe the reason we couldn't figure out what it does is it isn't dungeon tech, it's something more alive than that. Okay, that's awful. 2 questions, Reed ticked off on his fingers. What sort of nightmare bugs is it growing, and what do we do with it? Then he added a 3rd question. Also, why was it full of IDs? Did they grow the things into agents? He and Nick shared a grimace. At the same time, they both said, creepy, before Nick shook off the disgust and tried to come up with a different answer. I mean, we could just break it. But also, what if it grows something friendly? If they were holding on to it, then we know it was at least friendly to them, Reed countered. That doesn't mean it's going to like us. True. Still, doesn't answer why they had their IDs in there. He looked down at the object, the suspected hive, again. I'm going to try it, Nick said, pulling out a wallet from his back pocket. I feel like I should be armed for this, and maybe you should wait and... Reed sighed. All right, you did it. Cool. Okay. Are you dead? Nikhail looked up from where he had dropped his driver's license into one of the glowing hexes. No, nothing happened. Except it seems like it liked my ID. He cleared his throat. And I can't pull it back out. And I needed that, probably. Well, good news. You get to be under observation from now until we figure out what that was. Reed shook his head. Why is everyone so goddamn reckless around here? He threw up his good arm in exasperation. Did we all learn nothing from that time we blew a hole in the parking lot? I think the others learned more than me. Davis learned a lot. He actually spoke up in a meeting, Nick cheerfully replied. Anyway, this seems safe to carry, so let's get this stuff moved and then I'll go sit patiently while everyone asks me questions I can't answer yet. James doesn't have to deal with this, Reed griped. James gets a vacation. Do I get a vacation? No, I get stupidly reckless minions. He complained all the way until the elevator doors opened on another basement and they finally cleared away the last of the clutter. By that point, he'd come to terms with the fact that he was more worried than angry, but the complaining had a momentum of its own by then, and it seemed like it fit his growing image of the grumpy old scientist a little bit better in front of the rest of the division. Never mind that he was younger than a third of them, or that he wasn't really much of a scientist at all. and kind of more of a manager that kept people directed at projects that mattered and wrote the reports when they were too excited to get to them. What was important was that most days they discovered something, and no one got hurt. Nick did something stupid, Reed announced to the room as they walked in and dropped their boxes by a half-assembled IKEA shelf. Someone keep an eye on him, and if he starts trying to gnaw anyone's arm off, remember that you stop zombies by taking out the brain. If he was lucky, today would be like most days. Reed sighed and started looking around for the cobbled-together series of vision enhancements that he and Momo had put together a month ago, and that served as the closest thing they had to an identification system for stuff like this. Hopefully, Nick would be okay with the massive invasion of privacy. Reed was absolutely correct. James, in fact, did not have to deal with that. He and Anesh had woken up too late for the hotel's probably not very good breakfast service, so they'd gone to an IHOP in the time-honored tradition of late-morning road trips since the dawn of pancakes themselves. The waitress had given some weird looks to Ganesh and Rufus as the Dungeon Life sat on the table, either drinking a small dish of coffee or trying to help Anesh solve a crossword, respectively. But they tipped well, and there were no problems, so nobody complained. They had driven for 600 miles and spent at least 3 hours of that trip debating about fan fiction. They spent a bit of time, when they had serious energy and mental states that were a little more awake, talking about infomorphs. I think we've been missing something a bit, James told Anesh. I almost feel like I understand it, but I don't really know why I feel like something is just a bit off. What's your theory so far? Okay, remember when research tried to make an infomorph? Curious, yes, it was a disaster. We almost caused real problems that time. Right. So what's the difference between, say, Curious and Pathfinder, or Curious and Planner, or that one that died off after a while that kept me from using weapons? I mean, all the other ones you listed didn't start with names, for one thing. Anesh shrugged from the driver's seat that he was currently occupying after their breakfast and they'd gotten back on the road. What are you getting at? James slumped forward in his seat so his head was right against the air vents, making an affirmative grunt. Mostly that, he said. They started out small? Narrow, maybe. Not simple, because they weren't simple concepts. They were like incredibly complex and relied on layered levels of context. Path was just a map, wasn't she? Planner was a compulsion to frame the office as a job and be on time for certain days. But Curious was just that. She was a word, a broad idea, every piece of baggage that came with it all at once. So you think the way to make an infomorph, safely anyway, is to create something that's so narrow it's kind of meaningless, and then let it grow into what it's going to be? Anesh asked. James shrugged, rolling his head back to the seat cushions so he could look into the back seat via the rearview mirror. I mean, yeah, maybe. Yeah, same thing as with physical life, right? We don't make tools, we make family. And maybe, like, that's why Pendragon is the way she is. Why she's willing to fly into the depths of Officium Mundi to pull Dave out. No one told her that she had to. This might be you projecting, Anesh pointed out. I know for a fact you only have long hair because every time someone tries to tell you you should cut it, you refuse out of spite and the timer resets. Ah, James exclaimed, but did not argue with what he knew was the truth. I do think I'm right, he said, quieter. Well, Anesh offered, we've got a couple purples in the back. We could try when we stop for the night. Maybe, James said. For now, I'm going to nap. I didn't sleep well, and there's nothing to see here but cows. God, yeah, so many cows. Anesh shook his head. Enjoy your nap, he added, and turned the music up a notch or two. Just a normal day for the two of them. While everyone else was at work, they were halfway to where they were heading.